What happens when an undercover CEO discovers that his own business is being run by a corrupt manager? Instead of sitting back, he disguises himself as a trainee to uncover the truth. What he finds is worse than he imagined: overworked employees, unfair wages, and customers being scammed. But he's not here just to watch. He's here to fix it. This is the story of a CEO who goes undercover to take back control, fire the toxic boss, and transform his company from the ground up. Stay tuned to see how one bold decision changes everything. Ethan Caldwell sat in his home office, sipping his coffee as he reviewed reports from his luxury car repair chain, Elite Auto Care. Everything seemed normal, profits steady, customer reviews decent, but something didn't sit right. Then, an alert popped up on his screen, a flagged security footage from one of his garages. Frowning, he clicked play. The video showed a scene outside one of his shops. A frail elderly man with a broken-down car struggling near the entrance. One of his mechanics, Sophia Reed, a hard-working and skilled technician, stepped out of the garage. Instead of ignoring him, she knelt beside the car, assessed the issue, and without hesitation, helped him restart his engine. Ethan watched as she smiled, patted the old man's shoulder, and wished him a safe trip. It was an act of simple kindness, one that should have been celebrated, not condemned. But then the tone of the footage shifted. Just as Sophia turned back toward the shop, Nick Dawson, the manager, stormed outside, his expression furious. There was no sound, but his aggressive gestures made everything clear. He was angry. Sophia tried to explain, but Nick shook his head sharply, then pointed toward the parking lot. Fired. Just like that. Ethan's stomach tightened. This wasn't just any repair shop. This was his. He had built Elite Auto Care to be a customer-first business, a place where employees took pride in their work and treated people fairly. Yet here was a manager punishing someone for helping a man in need. Frustrated, Ethan picked up his phone and dialed Laura Mitchell, the regional operations director. When she answered, he wasted no time. "Why did one of my best mechanics just get fired for helping a customer?" he demanded. Laura, ever the corporate loyalist, responded in a measured tone, explaining that Nick followed company policy, no unauthorized services without payment. She reminded Ethan that if employees were allowed to give out free help, it could be taken advantage of. Ethan clenched his jaw. He understood policies, structure, and profit margins, but he also understood basic decency. "And you think firing her on the spot was the right move?" he asked. Laura hesitated but stuck to her script. "Nick is one of our best performing managers. He knows what's best for the shop." That was all Ethan needed to hear. His repair shops were thriving financially, but at what cost? He had never worked a shift inside one himself, trusting his managers to uphold the company's values. But now he realized he had no idea what kind of culture had taken root under his leadership. This wasn't the business he wanted to run. Ethan exhaled sharply, closing his laptop. There was only one way to find out what was really going on. He needed to see it for himself, and the only way to do that? Go undercover. The next morning, Ethan Caldwell stood in front of Elite Auto Care's busiest location, dressed in faded work jeans, steel-toe boots, and a grease-stained shop uniform. His usual polished executive look was gone, his signature suit and watch replaced by a worn-out baseball cap and safety goggles. To complete the disguise, he even scuffed his hands with oil, making sure he looked like a mechanic who had spent years in the trenches. No one would suspect the CEO of a multi-million-dollar auto repair chain was about to spend the day as a trainee. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The scent of motor oil, burnt rubber, and metal filled the air. The shop was already bustling, mechanics hunched over cars, tools clanking, engines revving. Behind the counter, customers waited, some impatiently tapping their feet. Nick Dawson, the shop manager, stood near the garage entrance, barking orders at a junior technician while barely glancing up from his clipboard. When Ethan approached, Nick finally looked up. "You must be the new guy," Nick grunted, his eyes flicking over Ethan dismissively. "Name?" "Really," Ethan said smoothly, using a shortened version of his middle name. Nick barely nodded. "Great. We're short-staffed, so don't expect a slow day. You'll shadow Ryan Foster, our lead mechanic. Just stay out of the way and don't screw anything up." Ryan, a tall, broad-shouldered man with grease-covered hands and tired eyes, gave Ethan a once-over before sighing. "Guess you're with me, rookie." Let's get to work. As Ethan followed Ryan through the shop, he quickly realized something was very wrong. The mechanics looked exhausted and demoralized. They moved with efficiency, but there was no energy, only routine, like they were running on autopilot. Ethan had spent years in the industry before becoming an owner. He knew what a well-run shop looked like, and this wasn't it. Ryan led him to a workstation and handed him a wrench. First rule, stay out of Nick's way. He doesn't like people slowing him down. Ethan nodded, absorbing everything. He had just walked in, and already he could tell this wasn't just a bad shop manager, this was a toxic workplace, and he was here to find out just how deep the rot went. Ethan spent the next few hours shadowing Ryan, observing the daily grind inside the repair shop. It didn't take long to confirm what he had suspected. This place was a disaster behind the scenes. The mechanics were overworked, underpaid, and constantly on edge. Despite their skills, they were treated like disposable labor, rather than valued employees. Every time someone fell behind schedule, Nick Dawson would swoop in, barking orders but refusing to lift a finger to help. As Ethan worked alongside Ryan, he overheard a frustrated conversation between two younger mechanics. "Nick cut my hours again," one of them muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Said I wasn't efficient enough, but I finished 2 jobs faster than anyone yesterday." The other mechanic shook his head. "He's been doing that to everyone. If you complain, he threatens to replace you." Ethan clenched his jaw. So Nick was manipulating work schedules to control his employees, cutting their pay without justification. But that wasn't the worst of it. At the front desk, a middle-aged customer argued with the receptionist. $1,200 for brake pads? That's ridiculous. I came in for a checkup, not a full replacement. The receptionist, clearly uncomfortable, glanced at the printed bill before answering, "I understand, sir, but..." Nick appeared out of nowhere, interrupting. "You signed the service agreement. If you don't want quality work, you can take your car somewhere else." The man looked stunned. "I wasn't told this was mandatory." Nick folded his arms. "That's the price. Pay it or leave." Ethan fought the urge to step in and call Nick out right there. Instead, he observed as the customer sighed in frustration and handed over his credit card, feeling trapped into the unnecessary charges. Ethan turned to Ryan. "Does he do that a lot?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "Every day." He exhaled sharply before adding, "It wasn't always like this. Before Nick took over, we actually gave customers honest assessments. Now, if we don't sell, we're in trouble." Ethan's frustration grew. Nick wasn't just running a toxic shop, he was scamming customers and abusing his employees to maximize profits. Then came the final confirmation of how far Nick's control went. During their lunch break, Ethan casually asked, "Hey, whatever happened to that mechanic Sophia?" Ryan's face darkened. "She got fired last week. For helping some old guy fix his car outside. Nick called it stealing company resources." Ethan felt his stomach churn. He had seen it on the footage, but hearing it firsthand made it real. This wasn't just bad management, this was outright exploitation. Ethan had seen enough. It was time for Nick to go. By late afternoon, the shop was running at full speed when the glass door swung open and Sophia Reed stepped inside. Dressed in jeans and a hoodie instead of her mechanic's uniform, she looked both determined and wary. She walked straight up to the front desk, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here for my final paycheck." The receptionist hesitated, glancing nervously toward the manager's office. Within seconds, Nick Dawson appeared, his expression twisting into a smirk. "Didn't I tell you? I'll mail it when I get around to it." Sophia crossed her arms. "You had it yesterday. Just give it to me, Nick." Nick's smirk disappeared. "Watch your tone," he snapped. "You're lucky I don't charge you for the parts you wasted on that old man's car." Ethan, still in disguise as Eli, the trainee, had seen enough. His hands tightened into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was his moment. Time to take control. He stepped forward. "Actually, Nick, I think you have time to handle this now." Nick turned, eyes narrowing at Ethan. "And who the hell are you to tell me how to run my shop?" Ethan exhaled, took off his cap, and then removed his safety goggles, revealing his face. The room went silent. Recognition dawned in the employee's eyes. Murmurs swept through the shop. Nick's face paled. "Wait. What?" Ethan met his stunned expression with an icy calm. "I'm Ethan Caldwell, and I own this business." Silence. Nick opened his mouth to respond, but Ethan cut him off. "For the past 2 days, I've watched you overcharge customers, underpay employees, and create a toxic work environment. I watched you fire one of my best mechanics for an act of kindness while you run this shop into the ground. That ends today." Nick scoffed, trying to recover. "Now hold on, I was just enforcing company policy." Ethan shook his head. "No, Nick, you weren't enforcing policy, you were abusing your power." He gestured toward Sophia. "She's rehired, effective immediately." Then, looking back at Nick, his tone hardened. "And you? You're done here. Pack your things and get out." Nick's jaw clenched. He scanned the room, looking for support, but no one spoke up. The employees weren't afraid of him anymore. After a tense pause, Nick let out a bitter chuckle, grabbed his clipboard, and stormed toward the exit. The door slammed shut behind him. For the first time since stepping into the shop, Ethan felt the air shift, a weight lifting off the employees. He turned back to the team. "Things are going to change, starting now." The moment Nick walked out, the entire repair shop seemed to take a collective breath. The tension that had weighed down the mechanics for so long finally started to lift. Some exchanged uncertain glances, as if trying to process what had just happened. Others, like Ryan Foster, seemed cautiously optimistic. Ethan Caldwell turned to face his employees, determined to make things right. "The way this shop has been run? That's not the company I built," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. "We're going to change that, starting today." The first order of business was reinstating Sophia. He turned to her and said, "If you still want your job, it's yours." Sophia blinked, clearly surprised. After a pause, she nodded. "Yeah, I do." "Good," Ethan said, then shifted his focus to Ryan. "I need someone I can trust to run this place the right way. Someone who knows what it means to be a leader, not a tyrant. You up for it?" Ryan hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Absolutely." Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "Then consider yourself the new shop manager." A ripple of approval passed through the team, a few mechanics nodding in silent agreement. Ryan had always been respected, unlike Nick. With the leadership issue settled, Ethan moved on to the next major problem: work conditions. "I want to hear from all of you," he said, addressing the group. "Tell me everything: unpaid hours, broken equipment, whatever's been swept under the rug." One by one, employees spoke up. Schedules had been cut unfairly. Overtime hours had gone unpaid. The air compressor had been leaking for months, and Nick refused to authorize repairs. Even the tools were worn out and barely functional. Ethan took notes, committing each issue to memory. "Consider it all handled," he assured them. "And one more thing, helping customers the right way will never get you fired again." Sophia, arms still crossed, studied him. "And what if a corporation doesn't like that?" Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. "Then corporate changes, not us." For the first time since he had stepped foot in this shop, he saw something new in the employees' eyes. Not just relief, but hope. With Nick gone and Ryan stepping in as manager, Ethan wasted no time putting his plans into action. Real change wasn't about words, it was about action. The next morning he arrived at the shop early, clipboard in hand, ready to tackle the long list of issues his employees had voiced. The first thing he did was call in a maintenance crew to inspect and repair all faulty equipment, including the air compressor, the diagnostic tools, and even the outdated software at the front desk. Employees exchanged skeptical glances as the repair team rolled in. They had been ignored for so long they didn't believe anything would actually be fixed. But by noon, when the air compressor was finally up and running again, mechanics started realizing, this time, it was different. Next, Ethan sat down in the manager's office, which had been Nick's disorganized mess. He sifted through payroll records and quickly found glaring inconsistencies. Employees had been shorted wages, schedules manipulated to cut labor costs, and promised overtime pay that never appeared. That ended today. He made immediate payroll corrections, ensuring everyone got what they were owed. At lunchtime, Ethan gathered the team for a quick meeting. From now on, schedules will be fair, pay will reflect the work you put in, and no one will be forced to cut corners for profit, he told them. We do things the right way, or we don't do them at all. Sophia, now back in uniform, leaned against the workbench, and if some customer actually needs help but can't afford it? Ethan didn't hesitate. Then we help them, and no one gets fired for doing the right thing. For the first time in a long time, the mechanic seemed energized, working with a new sense of purpose. Customers started noticing too. That afternoon, a longtime client stopped by for a tune-up and remarked, "This place feels different today, in a good way." Ethan smiled, watching as his employees worked together like a real team. Fixing the shop's culture wasn't going to happen overnight, but today, they had taken the first real step in the right direction. The next morning, Ethan Caldwell arrived at the shop just as the sun peeked over the horizon. For the first time since stepping foot in this place, he wasn't here to investigate, he was here to watch it flourish. The shop was already buzzing with energy, but it wasn't the tense, exhausted atmosphere he had first walked into. There was a shift, a lightness that hadn't been there before. Ryan was in the garage, giving clear instructions to a few junior mechanics, not barking orders, but actually leading. Sophia worked at a station nearby, fixing an engine component with focused precision. A few employees joked with one another as they prepared for the day, their movements sharper, more confident. It wasn't perfect yet, but the fear that had once hung in the air was gone. Then the glass door swung open. An elderly man stepped inside, his weathered hands gripping the straps of a worn-out satchel. Ethan recognized him immediately, the same man Sophia had helped the day she was fired. He hesitated near the counter, looking unsure. Sophia wiped her hands on a rag and approached him with a warm smile. "Welcome back. What can I do for you?" The man hesitated, glancing at Ethan, then back at Sophia. I just wanted to say thank you," he said quietly. "I never forgot your kindness. You didn't have to help me, but you did, and I wanted to make sure you knew how much that meant." Sophia's smile widened, and Ethan watched as she stood a little taller. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on the counter. "That's exactly the kind of service we believe in here," he said, "and it's never going to change." The man nodded, his expression filled with gratitude before he stepped back outside. Ethan turned to Sophia. "You've got something special, you know that?" She chuckled. "If you're about to offer me a management job again, I still don't know." Ethan smirked. "That's fine, I'll just keep asking." For the first time in a long time, the shop felt like the business Ethan had always envisioned. Employees weren't just working for a paycheck, they were working towards something better. And as he watched his team tackle the first jobs of the day, he knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. The story of Ethan Caldwell's undercover experience teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, integrity, and the importance of workplace culture. As a business owner, Ethan assumed his company's values were being upheld, but by going undercover, he discovered the reality was far different. It highlighted a crucial truth: a company's culture isn't defined by policies, but by the actions of the people in charge. One of the biggest takeaways is that leadership isn't about control, it's about empowering people. A toxic manager like Nick created a fearful, oppressive workplace where employees were undervalued and customers were exploited. In contrast, real leadership, like what Ethan and Ryan demonstrated, focuses on fairness, respect, and trust. When employees feel appreciated and supported, they perform better, stay loyal, and take pride in their work. The story also reinforces that profit should never come at the expense of ethics. Helping customers and treating employees with fairness isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. A company thrives when it values people over policies, creating an environment where both employees and customers want to stay. Ultimately, Ethan's journey proves that real change starts at the top, and leadership means leading by example.